Greetings to Jan Bosfy, psychotherapist and a Buddhist teacher. He was in Hungary now, giving a Buddhist retreat in the year 2015. Dear Jan, I want to ask you about your life and work.
Well, I just finished a retreat in Hungary. We finished it yesterday, 5-day retreat. And that's what I like to do. I should be retired maybe at this moment. I'm 71 now. But I like to teach Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, and to conduct retreats like we just did in Hungary. I'm still doing this in Holland as well. I have my own small center in which I give many retreats. And also in this center we do together, my wife and me. Also we give workshops for professional helpers. There is psychotherapy in it and there is Buddhism in it. If you want, you can call that double. Those are different trainings that I received, but it doesn't feel very double to me. And well, nowadays I conduct retreats in Holland, but also in Hungary, for instance, also in Germany, sometimes in France, and I really like to do that, though it's hard work.
To be relaxed, it is a hard work.
Yes, it's quite a job to be relaxed, to remain relaxed, and I've learned that better in the past years, but sometimes I'm tense as well. The training program to become a so-called Dharma teacher, there has not been a formal training program. That's not the way it's done, at least not in the tradition I come from, which is the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese monk, Zen master, poet, activist, and I just started being a student of him, and slowly at the beginning I didn't like his teachings at all, but slowly I started to understand them and developed further. And so later on in this Buddhist career I was asked to be a Dhamma teacher. I was teaching already, but then I continued as a Dhamma teacher. And this was at the time I still was working a little after the time I was working as a therapist and a trainer for people to become a therapist. And I remember one day I said, I've had enough of this suffering. Daily working with people who suffered as a therapist. And I said, well, I've done this for 30, 40 years. I've done my share. I stop, I quit. So I stopped. I stopped and said, I don't know what will happen next, but I don't do this anymore. I hoped by that time that the suffering of other people that I had to face daily, I got a holiday from that. And then I was asked to become a Dhamma teacher. And what happened? The same suffering came back. People suffering from the same pains and asked the same questions. So it is impossible to get rid of suffering. But something changed. After a while, I started seeing that suffering is not just suffering. There is also happiness in the suffering. And this is also the latest views I have clearly show this to me. The difference between suffering and happiness we usually make. Now I'm suffering, now I'm happy. No, there's happiness in the suffering and there's suffering in the happiness. I started as a psychology student, and I still remember I had a question there. I wanted to understand something. And by then, in a primitive way, I said, I want to understand how it's possible that people can think and be aware. That was a miracle to me. And I thought this miracle can be answered by studying psychology. So I studied psychology, mainly industrial psychology, social psychology, and not clinical psychology. And after a while I saw I won't get answers to my question. And but okay, I finished the studies, and during my studies already I worked as an assistant, and shortly after it I became a teacher at university, and I gave trainings to managers and so on. So at a relatively young age I was in all the expensive hotels and resorts for giving trainings to what I called the directors. I was a small guy. I was only 25 or younger, and so all these people who were there. You know how this started? It was wonderful. I had a job as a student at a small institute, and this institute was working for several industries. And one day there was a conference because there were quarrels, difficulties, conflicts in one of those businesses. And my boss said, just come along and you write notes. And next day you present those notes at the beginning of the day. So I did. And the first day I made notes and presented my notes. And the second day I was sitting there all day making notes, and it was boring. And I noticed many things that were not in the words. So when I made my notes, just I wrote next to it some little remarks like, Mr. A says I'm happy, but his face is very unhappy, or something like that. And I wrote these things, and then in the evening I thought, why not? Probably it will cost me this job, but I present it that way tomorrow. I write like a play, I write all the things that a theater player also would read in his text. So and the next morning, so I read out aloud, Mr. A says, and moves a lot with his feet, and so on and so on. Mr. A is, Mr. B says, and so on. And after that, a long silence. Oh, my heart was beating like mad. And I thought, well, this is it. And I waited and waited. And then it turned out I was very lucky. there was a brave man, and he spoke first, and he said, he's right. He's right. I said this, but I felt something quite different, and I'd better be honest. And this set a trend. So other people also in that company accepted my notes. At those days we had sensitivity training and so on, and I didn't know anything about it, but my boss said, you do it. He went to America and saw how this worked, and he said to me, you can do that too. All you got to do is to be silent, and sometimes to make some smart remarks. That's what he told me. Every time in my life when I thought I've done this, or this is not interesting anymore, or it's boring, or it's not helpful, I was quite radical and said, I stop it. For instance, for some time I had a job to train general practitioners, doctors. And after a couple of years I thought, I don't like this anymore. In this setting it was done. But it was a well-paid job, and we had small children. And I said, sorry, I don't do this anymore. I start my own practice. And I remember Riekje, my wife, she was quite afraid and said, oh, don't do this, please, 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 please. I said, no, we can do this. And I just started my own practice. And it turned out it worked well. So I became a therapist at that moment. Before that I already gave therapy sessions, but then it was full-time. No, not full-time, because there were not enough clients at the beginning, but slowly, also with the help of my wife, it grew out into a center. My wife, Riekje, she's not a psychologist. She studied literature. And later on, when she was quite afraid of what I was doing, having my own practice, starting my own center, she thought maybe for safety I start writing a book, because that's good advertisement. And there were also other reasons why she wanted to write a book. So she wrote a book, the first one. And after that, I think 8 books were published by her. And so slowly she became involved in the center. First, I remember I was giving therapy groups, and she was attending them. She was there making coffee and tea. And then slowly she started to make little remarks during the sessions. And I remember I was working hard with a client, finding out things and not finding a good solution, or just, and she was just sitting there watching it. And then she said just one sentence that said it all. Oh, I was frustrated a little bit, my ego was frustrated, but it was wonderful because it was helpful to the client, to the whole process. And so slowly she learned by attending my workshops. She learned to become a therapist herself without official training. But my training was not official as well. I was a psychologist, okay, but I did gestalt therapy, bioenergetics, psychosynthesis, all therapies that were not officially recognized by that time, and even now it's not really recognized. I didn't mind. I just chose whatever seemed to be helpful. And Rikia developed into a wonderful therapist as well, and a wonderful author of books. Some of them have been translated into Hungarian. And she also became a wonderful painter, but that's another story. From the beginning, even when I became a student in psychology, remember my question was, how is it possible that people can think and be aware? My interest was from the very beginning, even earlier. It was larger than just the personal stuff. There was some real searching in it, searching truth, searching those things that normally are not answered by science, or, you know. And so in psychotherapy as well, people came in with a problem, and I didn't really address to the problem. I saw it as, well, this is your card, your identification, your ticket to come in. But this problem is just a little manifestation of something. What's behind? What's the bigger thing? How does it connect? So I always saw more than a problem or a patient or a client. I always was looking wider until the whole universe, and trying to connect people to what is bigger, greater than just the personal life and personal problems. And sometimes I worked on a personal level, but very often I touched what was called the transpersonal. So bigger than the ego, going at least to the heart, to love, compassion, insight, patience, and so on, and even wider. There was the Transpersonal Association, a European one, and there was one in Holland, and there were activities, there was a magazine, and so on. And I don't know, I think the director of it in Holland, Rumelt Mol, he invited me to do something or to write in the magazine, something like that. So I came into contact. Oh yes, I remember there were yearly conferences organized by this association. And I was invited to take part, to lead parts of one of those conferences. And so that's where it started. So I came into contact with the Transpersonal Association. Of course, I also had read books, Ken Wilber, about transpersonal psychology and so on. So I became involved. And by the way, that's how I got to Hungary. After a couple of years, after the system change, after the wall fell down, from this Transpersonal Association, they developed a project called East-West Project. And I think the aim was to help the formal communist countries. We had a chance in the West to develop all kinds of things, and the idea was, well, maybe we can help a little bit and show a little bit of that in the Eastern countries. And maybe that was not true at all, because there's wonderful spiritual life in, for instance, Hungary. But nevertheless, we thought we could contribute. And maybe the only contribution was our solidarity, showing we are with you, we are coming. So I remember, so when this East-West project started, I initiated the idea, why not have all the directors of all these New Age-like centers in Holland, why not have them together and give a summer school in some of the formal communist countries? Institutions a little bit more cooperative instead of competitive. So we all came together, many of them, and we developed an idea of a summer school. And originally that would go to Russia, to St. Petersburg. But for some reason that was cancelled. And we said, well, we still have this idea. And then for some reason Hungary came into the picture, and we said, okay, we go to Hungary. So that was the first summer school organized in Hungary. And I think some 100 people were there, I don't remember exactly. And that's where I met Oros Kati. And she worked as a psychotherapist. And for some reason we got connected, and she invited me to come to Budapest to give a workshop to her clients. And later on this developed into a regular coming of me to Hungary, also in the training program she organized, and that training program got a little bit of the orientation of our Dutch program, and I came each year, and until the point I said, well, what's the use of asking me? You do completely well. There's a wonderful center now. I don't come anymore. There's no need. And of course there was the answer, but please, can you come? And I said, no, there's no need. But, and then I said, well, I don't do this therapy stuff anymore, but I want to come for meditation. I want to give a retreat or something like that. My parents were not religious at all. They were, if they were something, a little bit anti-religious. Atheistic anyhow. And their attitude was quite liberal. My father was kind of a lawyer, and he was a nice and gentle man. He liked to cultivate flowers, the garden inside the house. He was a wonderful piano player, classical music. He really could give small concerts as an amateur. And my mother was the opposite. She was quite noisy and talking all the time, and he suffered sometimes from it, but then he started playing the piano, which was louder than she was. And I remember playing together with him, quatre mains and so on. He also was horrible to me as a child. I had to study the piano. I wanted to play the violin, and when I was 5, and he said, that's okay, but start with the piano. And when you're 8, you can play the violin. And so I started playing piano. And when I was 8, he asked, and how about the violin? And I said, oh no, starting again with those exercises, no. Okay, and he had an absolute hearing. So each time I was practicing piano and he was in the other room, he yelled, this B should be an A, or, you know. Okay. This has nothing to do with your question. I just turned to my parents and this came up.
Yes.
From a very, very young age, there was something like, let him do it himself. I remember at kindergarten, all parents brought their children to the kindergarten on a bicycle or car, and I walked myself alone. And I had to cross a busy street. And my parents just said, okay, you do it. And looking now, I think, wow, but that was normal. So I crossed busy street. And I went alone. And this was the case with everything. This was wonderful on the one hand, but on the other hand, later on I said, you have not taught me anything. And you put my life at risk many times. Nevertheless, I went alone to kindergarten. And at a certain point I thought, why go to kindergarten? It's nicer here in these woods. So I didn't go to school. I was 4 years old. I said, I don't go. And I played in the bushes. And since I couldn't watch clocks, I had to observe all the time the street where the mother of one of the children of the class would pass to get my girlfriend. And then I knew it's time to go home. And I told at home, yes, it was wonderful at school. And of course, one day this mother didn't pass by for some reason, other road, or the daughter was ill. So I didn't come home. Or I did come home hours later, people searching for me and so on. And so my parents thought, well, he doesn't like to go to the kindergarten. And they decided to put me in a small class for 4 children, a private teacher, a small classroom, when I was 5. And it had the advantage that you could go to 2nd grade of when you were not yet 6. So I was, after that I was always 1 year early, and I didn't like that, but okay, that's another story. So they put me in this little class, and I was in love with the teacher. She was wonderful. She was the best. Like boys can be in love with the teacher. And so I listened carefully to all she said. And one day she said, everything has been created by God. Everything has been created by God. That was real news to me. And I started asking her, that curtain, has it been made by God? Yes, she said. And you? Yes, she said. And me? Yes. And this little wooden desk? Yes, sure. That was quite something. So it was created by God, and the lessons went on, and I was thinking and looking into this little wooden desk. Created by God, that must be very special. And while I looked in it, it changed. It changed to open space. It changed, well, nowadays I would say like moving atoms. It was open space. It was not solid wood anymore. Wonderful. And then after some time it became wood again, of course. And I drew a conclusion. I never told about it to no one because I thought, well, they won't understand. I thought, I drew a conclusion. Things are not exactly what they seem to be. There's something beyond, something behind. They have a certain appearance, but there's something beyond. That's where my interest in Buddhism, in transpersonal psychology, in whatever of these things started. That's where it consciously started. That's where my motivation to study psychology in a foolish way started. Yes. And another thing from this background, this very liberal background, do as you like. For instance, when I was a little bit older, maybe 6 or 7, when I was 7, I got a bicycle. And immediately I went on tours far away. Far, far, far away. And I liked it. So I really was not taught, but I learned to mind my own business, to really take care of myself, to really see what was needed and so on. Later on, for my little sister, she was 10 years after me, I took care of her because I saw she was not really treated well in the same way. So I took care of her. And so she became very religious. Okay, so because of all this, going to kindergarten on my own, bicycling on my own, later on when I went to gymnasium, was a big distance. It was 16 kilometers. I went on my bicycle alone, and each day, in rain or in sunshine, but one thing that came out of this, that at a very young age I already was how do you say this in English, an entrepreneur in French. I was setting up small businesses. Like at the age of 6, I started to make an exhibition of, I think, yeah, I'm sure, my dinky toy cars, the little, and other things, and selling limited, and people had to pay an entrance price, and then I got some money, and I remember I gave this to the cancer fund. And next year the exhibition was a little bit bigger and more money, and so at the age of 12 it was a big exhibition of all kinds of things and movies, and you know, I like to do that. It was easy for me to do it. I could see what was needed, and other people were involved, and I even got the mayor of the village I lived in to officially open it, and it was in the papers, and became famous. But so I, at a very young age, I learned to organize things too, and that was helpful later on when I started my own center, and so on and so on and so on. Yeah, so that also grew out of my early childhood. In Holland we have a famous football player. He's a coach now and older now, but he's called Johan Cruyff. And he also is kind of an amateur philosopher. He, for instance, he said, each advantage has a disadvantage, and each disadvantage has its advantage. That's exactly the same. He saw in each disadvantage, when the club was going down, was not going well, he saw the advantage. Now we can start anew. And the other way around. When things were very successful, he knew already this is a disadvantage. This will cause new unhappiness. And we have to start over or whatever. So I like this saying that he did already 30 years ago or something, and it's still repeated in Holland very often. Everyone knows it. So the first time I heard him say this, I immediately agreed and said, yes, this is how it is to me as well. The disadvantages of the way I was brought up also had many advantages, and the other way around. For instance, my parents were, after some time, not really rich but wealthy. And my grandparents, my grandmother, she lived alone on a very huge farm in the north of Holland. And very feudal. Huge farm, many workers on the fields. And I remember I liked being there. But I didn't like the difference between workers. And so you had a house, and it was quite separate from the workers. So I refused to eat in the house. When I was 6, 7, 12, I always ate with the workers. I went there. So there was the advantage of relative richness, wealth, but I felt it as a disadvantage. Same with my parents. I remember one day someone came to the door at the home of our family. It was at Christmas time, and this man wanted to sell things he had put in a wonderful plastic basket. You could see he really made it beautiful. All kinds of tins with fish and fruits and so on. Wonderful. And he came in, wanted to sell some of it, and he put it in the kitchen. He put it away to have a little talk. And he put it on the electrical oven that was switched off but still hot. So the plastic melted down and the whole basket. And I, as a boy, I saw the face of the man. I saw it going into almost despair. And my mother was not very much able to feel the feelings of other people. So she was just talking, and in the end I felt ashamed. She bought one little tin out of this basket. In her place I would have bought the whole basket, or because there should be happiness in this suffering for this man. Now, I lost your question more or less.
Labeling.
Labeling, yes, bad and good. So I've seen so often that what I labeled as bad turned out to be something that really was good. And when I look to people, sometimes I see people doing bad things. Killing or stealing. But when I notice this, I see this is not good. But the man I don't label as bad. Maybe out of this grows some beautiful insight in the man. This disadvantage can have a big advantage, and the other way around. Yeah, I stop labeling. I just see human beings, and we all do bad things and good things, so-called. But in the end, if you look behind it, into Buddhist teachings, in fact, this is basic teaching, not understood as such by most traditions nowadays. We talk about bad and good and happiness and suffering and so on, and we separate the two. Even in many cases, the aim of Buddhist practice is to become happy. And I think that is not the way Buddha meant it. So basic Buddhist teachings really say the good is in the bad and the bad is in the good. Happiness is in suffering, suffering is in happiness. So just realizing that this is the teaching that Buddha already gave, that has been passed on and also has been altered and has been adapted to either Christianity or the West or but the original teaching already, and we can read this in all the scriptures, show this. And when I became aware of this, I said, oh yes, of course, that's exactly how I sometimes, not always, experience things. Not always, because as each human being, I also am inclined to follow what in Buddhism is called manas. Manas is the one who helps us to survive, and for survival we need a separation between good and bad to be able to react quite quickly when needed. And this is what manas does. It stores all the little programs, the experiences, turning them in little programs, seeds, called seeds in Buddhism. Nowadays we would say apps, in little programs, and they are labeled like in a library, good or bad, black or white, ugly, beautiful, and so on and so on. And when needed for survival, manas can immediately take a decision. For instance, when you go off track with your car, you immediately know where to go. But manas also does this when it's not needed. And it also uses old information. We use old programs instead of being aware of the present situation and its needs. So to stop discriminating between good and bad, that's what Buddhist practice is about, and manas will be transformed, as it is called, into non-discriminating wisdom. But many times I'm aware that I'm discriminating, and that's a practice. It's just a practice to notice, now I'm discriminating. This is a beautiful lady. This is an ugly lady. No, this is a wonderful creature. You see, this is good, this is bad. This man who is in prison now has done bad things. Sure, it was not the right thing to do, and it caused a lot of suffering, both to a victim and probably also to himself. Yet, he is a man. And when properly addressed, we will maybe see that the suffering he's in also contains happiness, and he can turn in his life. As a child, I did not learn much about relationships, about emotions, about contact. There was a lot of distance and intellectual stuff. And the relationship between my parents was not really an example of a wonderful marriage. There was tension and difficulty. By the way, by that suffering, there was also happiness, because I noticed. And I remember quite clearly, I was 16 years old, I was standing at the bus stop, and I was thinking about the relationship of my parents. I was suffering from it, all this tension. I was thinking, and I saw clearly, it's because this, it's because that, she does this, he does that, this is how it works. And I even was so clear, I said, so clear as you are now, being 16-year-old, seeing this, you will never be that clear anymore. So it felt super clear. And so I really got an insight about the relationship of my parents. And I also responded to it not only by seeing it, but also by feeling what it did to me, and by being very gentle to myself. That was quite helpful. I think from there, it started that I became good at observing relationships and working with them. I had observed many times, and I could do quite well. But at that time, most of the time I was not taught, I was not a feeling person, not very empathetic, or, you know. I remember the first retreat. I went 25 years of age in London, Western Buddhist order, and it was all about suffering. And I said, this is not for me, this is for the old people, 30, 35, you know. This is for the old people, this is not for me, I'm happy, and it's okay, and I go to a party. And later on I understood about suffering. So relationships, I was not very good at it. My own relationships at that age, yes, were going on and off, another girl, another. I was just partying and so on. And then finally, after all this mist, I married to Rikje. By the way, we are together now, I think 45 years. It's a long time. Huh? And at the beginning, at the beginning, of course, the nice things, but after that, all the well-known sufferings and quarrels and troubles and that any relationship has. And I have been very lucky with meeting Rikje as my wife, because I was horrible. I was really, like young guys can be, I was a big ego by then, and whatever she would tell me, I would say, and she could not reach me, And I was horrible, looking back. By then I thought I was wonderful. And I would say almost any woman would have left me. But she didn't. And that made me so grateful. Even now, when I say this to you, I feel tears behind my eyes. She just suffered from it. She saw it. She kept on trying. But she didn't leave. And that made me so grateful. One day I realized this. I felt so grateful. I cried and cried and cried. I realized what she had done. And that was a turning point. It didn't mean that we stopped quarreling and so on. We still had that phase in our lives. So, but I was grateful, and from that moment on, I was a little bit more open to her. And thought, well, you have given me a lot. Now it's my turn to give you a lot. And then I forgot about it, but you know, I had seen it. Many quarrels, many of these things, also nice moments, children. And then one day I noticed what I had noticed already many times. After such a quarrel, we went apart, and she was crying loudly. I couldn't stand hearing it. Loud crying, could hear it in the whole house. Oh. And until that moment I had something, oh, this is horrible. And my reaction was more like, made me more angry as a defense. But then at a certain point I heard her crying and I realized, oh, she's suffering. I realized, it's crazy, you know. But then I really realized she's suffering, and I realized this is always happening after these quarrels. Whenever she is aggressive to me, it means she is suffering. There's suffering in this aggressive words. And I realized that, and I thought, oh yes, she's a human being, suffering. She can talk angry, but now I see there's suffering underneath. And I was not defensive anymore, or aggressive anymore. I could hear and say, oh yes, I hear you. You suffer. Well, different words, but like that. And she felt understood. And we could cry together. There we had a real relationship. I think it has been quite helpful that we were leading groups together. Like children like to have a father and a mother, and not just one. And so it's also felt the same way by students or clients. Of course, each man has a feminine side and each woman a male side. So very often we have done alone as well, and it worked out beautifully, but together was wonderful. Especially because we started most of our work together after the period of quarrels. So there was no power fights or you're better or you're worse, or why do you take all the space, or you know. I don't think much in terms of feminine and masculine. Of course, I make the discrimination, but I don't think much in those terms. Like in Jungian psychology, for instance, I don't think that much in those labels. Though I think both sides should be present wherever we are. You know, nowadays you see in meditation groups many women and not so many men. 30 years ago it was the opposite. There were hardly any women, it was all men. And the men now have disappeared. I think they are all in management courses or in logistics or in computers, which is a shame. We need both to be there, but we don't need the kind of thinking that is just logistic, and so also the men should change in themselves. And we need the feminine energy. In leadership, very often, traditionally, it's the men who take the lead. It's time already, for a long time, that women do as well and work together.
My last question would be about ecology and ecological future, and about the problems of the mankind.
Yes.
Please tell us something. How do you see now? What is the real problem in the world, and how do you see the solutions? Not in the level of the world, but what can we do? We personal level, in our life, in our family, in our groups.
Yes, yes, it's true that Earth is in danger, and many species are in danger, including mankind. We can go on and go on, but not endlessly. If we think about the future, we should ask ourselves, if we want to know how our future will be, we have to ask, what am I doing now? Because the future is in the now. Not in a way of feeling guilty or bad, that's not helpful. But just, you want to know your future, look in what you're doing now. And so worrying about the future doesn't help us. It gives despair, it gives worries, it gives anxieties, like we have many anxieties now about what's happening in wars in Ukraine and so on. We have many anxieties when we see how men develop. I think it's nothing new, it's repetition. The Romans were the same. Nevertheless, what can we do? Each in his own way, on his own place. Being mindful of what you consume, for instance. Which resources you use. Is it sustainable what you do? And we all have a responsibility in this. And we just have to look into ourselves and to see how am I behaving in this way. In Buddhism it's called right action. And this is derived from right view. And right view would be stopping to discriminate. And stopping to look through the colored glasses we all have, and that are designed mainly for egoistic reasons, for survival, personal survival. We have to leave these narrow views. We have to look with the eyes of a community, to look with the eyes of Earth, and not just our personal gain for the moment, because in the end there is no gain in it. We will all lose. And fortunately, like always, each advantage, each disadvantage has its advantages, as we saw before. Also now we have a lot of means of communication, so we see what's happening everywhere on the world. That's a burden to us and gives a lot of anxiety, but it's also a chance. We know, we see. And we see the suffering is big. And I've often seen, also in my personal life, for instance, or I saw with my children, sometimes they were in a crisis. And after that, they went ill for some time or something. And after that, something new happened. So sometimes we need a crisis. In the crisis already is the renewal. Already is the possibility of a different kind of life. And each of us can contribute by transforming oneself from discriminating, narrow-mindedness until to really looking deeply and having right action, right livelihood.